Breaking news right before the show gets ready to tape today. Apparently, Kevin Durant has worked it out with the Nets, and he's going to come back. He's going to play basketball. All right, so what does this mean? All right, a release statement from the Nets and also general manager Sean Marks. It says, Steve Nash and I, together with Joe Tsai, Claire Wu-Tsai, met with Kevin Durant and Rich Kleiman in Los Angeles yesterday. We've agreed to move forward with our partnership. We are focusing on basketball with one collective goal in mind, build a lasting franchise to bring a championship to Brooklyn. Funny enough, in that statement, there's a Nets logo and there's also a boardroom logo, which is the Kleiman Durant production. That part, I'm like, wait, you can throw that logo into the statement as well? I don't know. I mean, who gives a shit? So this is good news for Nets fans, right? I guess this is good news for everybody. I don't know if Durant, this is the part of it where I'm like, okay, I know what it is on paper, but I got to see it for a little while before I buy into the Nets. Because could there be any lingering stuff still going on? We're talking about all these different characters. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a massive assumption that maybe this thing gets derailed again with the people involved in all this. But I imagine the Nets said we don't want to trade you for some of these pieces. So what do you want to do here? I guess Durant decides after demanding a trade at the beginning of the free agency 2 weeks ago, demanding that Marks and Nash are fired. What does he say? Like, all right, here's the deal. I'll come back, throw the boardroom logo on the press release, and we're good. But Durant was always in an interesting spot here because he had 4 years left on the deal, which is new territory. Now, Ben Simmons, as I mentioned a year before, like, hey, look, Simmons can want out, but usually it's a year and a half left when you start to pull this stuff going. You better get something for me because I'm not re-signing here. And then the other fear that teams always have, and they will tell me this repeatedly, is that when you have the player that's demanding the trade with time left on his contract, you can sit there and say that you have the leverage because you have the contract and there's still multiple years left, like this Nets scenario. But if the player really doesn't want to be there, he can just fake an injury and get that second opinion. You can find something. Hey, the knee's a little banged up. There's an ankle. There's a shoulder problem. Now there's something going on with my back. Like, these are pro athletes. You can usually find something wrong and you can usually get that second opinion. And that way the player's not necessarily even doing anything wrong other than saying, I don't trust your health people. I'm not going to play. And then you're stuck there paying somebody max money that doesn't want to go ahead and play. The difference with Ben Simmons is I remember talking to some people about it and was like, nah, Simmons wouldn't do that. Like, he's healthy, he's good to go. But then he went with the mental health approach, which you get a lot of sympathy for. I had less and less, especially when he didn't even want to play with the Nets. And then he filed the grievance that most all of us knew was coming at some point to recoup some of that money back from the Sixers that they withheld when he didn't want to play. So the difference there is the Nets still want Durant. Durant is the better basketball player. Durant's issues are more about hurt feelings than I think a completely different mental approach to the game of basketball that makes you worry about him as a player. And I think those concerns are there for Simmons because you're still like, what is this guy actually going to be? And Philly didn't want him to be there. They just wanted to try to figure out some sort of asset exchange at some point once they knew it was untenable. I always kind of thought with Durant that, it's a dangerous game to sit here and start calling a star player's bluff. The history is not great. It doesn't really happen. I have one that I'm going to bring up here, but it doesn't really happen that often. The player usually always gets his way. But with Durant and having the 4 years left and knowing the trade market was a little bit more complicated because Durant wasn't going to want to just go anywhere, even if he had 4 years left. If you're another team that he didn't like, that says, well, we get his 4-year contract. Well, now you're just inheriting the Nets problem. Maybe he plays for a year and then he decides he wants out of there too. So that limited the market. The Boston deal, I thought at least was strong because there was one piece in Jaylen Brown that was better than a lot of the other pieces. It sounds like Scotty Barnes was never officially involved in the Toronto part of this. Maybe if they drag this out longer and longer, Toronto says, screw it, it's Kevin Durant, let's go ahead and do it. But it's August, so I guess we're not going to get to that point. The Phoenix deal around Mikal Bridges. Bridges isn't Jaylen Brown. He's a nice player. I like a lot of things about Bridges, but to have him be the focal piece, whatever, the number one piece coming back is like, could Bridges be a 2 on a really good basketball team? I'm not sure about that. I could be wrong, but I don't know that another team's super excited about it. And then the Miami stuff never made any sense to me. I need somebody, I'd say smarter, but I probably don't really believe that when it comes to the trade stuff. I need somebody to explain to me, why was Miami ever an option here? Like, what piece did they have? You going to tell me Tyler Hero? Nice player. But That one never really made a ton of sense. It didn't. And then, of course, they had the same problems that if it were a Bam deal, if Bam actually were going to be included at some point, which would change everything. Now, if you're talking Bam, that's different. But then we have that rookie extension rule that you can't have the same two players on, which was all part of the CBA and trying to limit some of this movement all over the place, some of the sign and trade things that happened, the extra year. There were these little mechanisms that they tweaked a bit to try to slow down some of the star player movement. As we know, that's not really happening. So, the Nets have Durant. The rare team that pushed back on their star demanding a trade, which is what we have right here with the Nets. Like, they didn't give in. They didn't just trade him for anybody. They didn't say, I guess we're screwed. They pushed back, and it looks like they've got the win here. Is a long-term win? I don't know. We'll get to that. But the Lakers did it in 2007 with Kobe. Kobe was on the warpath that summer. I remember because I was at Orlando for the pre-draft camp, the old Milk Center, when they switched it from Chicago to Orlando, and then everybody in the NBA is like, can we go back to Chicago? They did do that. I remember being at a stoplight, window down, another guy in the front office. Hey, man, what's up? You know, I was only a couple years at ESPN, and he nods, and he's just like, Kobe, man. He's like, here we go. And I'm thinking like, yeah. He was so pissed off. He's like, I want to go to Chicago. He went on with Stephen A. I think it was Stephen A. was local radio in New York. And Stephen A. was like, is there anything that can be done to prevent this from happening? And Kobe said, quote, no, bro. And then it changed where it was like, maybe he's going to be okay with coming back. Kobe was changing his mind, and he was doing it with such passion. It was weird. There would be this moment where it was like, he'll never play for the Lakers again. You're like, all right. And then it was, well, wait a minute. The Lakers are working on this thing. Like, nope, he's gone again. He just went on somewhere else. Like, he was going on all these shows, and it was still new. I mean, it's 15 years ago. So this wasn't happening even close to the frequency that we have today with the top guys. And the Lakers just didn't want to trade him. Apparently, there was maybe one deal to Detroit. Something could have happened with Rip Hamilton and some picks. But back then, they didn't trade 1,000 picks with every star guy. So it was a different marketplace back then. And then Kobe said that it was true, potentially. So I don't know if that meant the Lakers had something that they liked with Detroit and they would have done it. But Kobe was like, I'm not going to Detroit. Detroit's a no. So there's always some legend about that. And then he wanted to go to Chicago. But the funny thing that Kobe wanted with Chicago was that he was like, don't trade any good players for me because I don't want the team to suck when I show up. We're like, well, wait, you want out of here, but you also don't want anyone good to be traded for you, so the Bulls are already really good? Because Kobe didn't want to go to some rebuilding thing. But, you know, back then you actually traded good players for the other good player if these trades even happened, and they didn't happen to this. So this was a really, really big deal. Then Greg Anthony, of all people, had an addition to the ESPN story that I was reading again from 2007, where it was basically stated that Greg Anthony talked to Kobe, and Kobe was like, I'll come back, but only if the Lakers tell me or get rid of the person who was the leak, involved in the leak, saying that I'm the reason that Shaq isn't here anymore. And depending on what you believe on all the history that we've read about this stuff, you know, the Kobe Shaq thing was a mess. Shaq wanted another $100 million extension from Dr. Buss. Dr. Buss wasn't sure that it was a great bet because Shaq hadn't really put in the effort to maintain his body. Kobe was super pissed about the dynamic of I do all this work and he can't do this work, which Kobe was right about. But that breakup had a million different reasons. And to say it was singularly just about Kobe's relationship with Shaq, I don't think is entirely accurate because Shaq also wanted to get paid. And guess what? When Shaq got traded to the Miami Heat, he ended up getting that big extension and it worked out for Miami. So then he doesn't get traded. He just doesn't because the Lakers didn't want to trade Kobe Bryant. It ended up being the greatest thing for the Lakers and ended up being a great thing for Kobe Bryant. Now, does that mean this is going to happen here with the Nets? I don't know that. Because that's what I think happens when we have these big moments is it's like, okay, well, now what does this mean? Does this mean we're going to have some sort of pivot with NBA power structures where the next star that asks out, the team will say, hey, look what happened with Durant. They just held out and he came back and played and it all worked out. I think that's when you make the mistakes. I don't know that it's going to be this massive pivot. I respect the Nets for not giving in to a trade that they didn't want to give into. You know, the other part of this too was, has this been a disaster for this entire Nets experiment? I've heard plenty of people say, well, teams will have second thoughts about how they'll want to build out their team. And they'll look at the Nets saying, maybe don't hand the keys over to these guys. No, that's not going to happen. Every single team that would have a chance to bring in Kyrie to get Durant would do it, and they'll do it again. So I don't believe that. But I'm more open-minded about, could we have more teams calling, I shouldn't say call the bluff, but just stand strong and deny the player his request. That's at least what you have here. And the Sean Marks part of it, and Durant wanting him fired, I'm sure Marks in a private moment with his buddies is like, fuck that guy. I don't know that, but I think it's probably a pretty good guess. But you're a GM. You know, it's not like he's passing the ball to you. And I don't know where Steve Nash's head would be with this whole thing. Like sometimes we could sit there and say, oh, he's got the perfect demeanor. He's really easygoing. He's fine. I don't know, man. The guy just wanted him fired. And now you're going to come back and coach him? But that probably won't really matter, because if Kyrie is engaged, Simmons is engaged, and Durant is Durant, and the rest of the pieces are relatively healthy, and the other things they've had, this is a really good basketball team. So it's better for the Nets today than any other version of this. So that's the good news. But as far as who they are as a team, I'm just going to have to see a little basketball from this group before I'm ready to buy all in.